Hey there, and welcome to College is Fine, Everything's Fine, the podcast that helps you keep your head above campus chaos without losing your sense of self or your sense of humor. I'm Dr. Sarah Olivo.
And I'm Dr. Liz Seidler. We're clinical psychologists who help students navigate everything from friendship drama and academic pressure to figuring out who they are when nobody and everybody is watching.
We take real stories from college life and turn them into simple, science-backed tips you can actually use. No fluff, just what works.
Think of it as your mental health toolkit for thriving, not just surviving college life. All right, Sarah, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Listeners, we're really excited. This is a topic that Sarah and I both in our offices and definitely when asking college students what they're kind of experiencing on campus. And maybe I'm going to be honest, a conversation that I'm a little nervous about because I'm just going to be honest, it's difficult for me, even as a therapist, to really sit with a lot of the emotions people have about the current climate of the world as people are navigating their values and dealing with a lot of current events. So that's why we had to bring somebody in who's an expert on this. So
Yeah, we outsourced.
and I'm hoping might learn some things for myself as well as a way to support college students. So Bob, you are here today. Would you do us the favor of introducing yourself and tell our listeners all about you?
Sure thing. Thanks, Liz and Sarah, for having me. And I am, first of all, just to say, super excited to be here because, in some sense, the inspiration for a lot of the work that I do comes from working with university students, both undergraduates and then, in particular, law students. My name is Bob Bordone. I specialize in conflict and negotiation and dispute resolution, and do a lot of work around dialogue. I spent 2 decades teaching full-time at Harvard Law School, and continue to do a lot of executive education at Harvard, but I'm not teaching full-time in the law school environment. But I've spent the last few years writing a book on conflict resilience that was very much inspired by some of what you just mentioned, Liz, this challenge in extremely polarizing times of talking about topics that really can cut to the heart of emotions and identity, and in ways that are very hard and yet very important, particularly as we live, in this moment in our country where divisions are rife on university campuses, but more than that, right? Obviously in Washington, but even in families. So anyway, it's a long intro. I'm really glad to be here.
No, it's perfect. I think, yeah, there's always in college campuses, the typical conflicts you might see. My roommate goes out way too late, or I get up really early and she won't let me turn the light on. But I think that Liz and I have both started to see and hear a lot more about a much deeper concern where some of the conflicts are really just much more about your identity or your religion or your faith, your political stance. We've had people who are like, I can't go to the formal with this person because they like to a pro-Trump post their friend put on, or I can't ask out some specific, maybe I'm afraid to ask out somebody or get to know people because I stand on one side of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they stand on the other. And so now it's so much more perhaps divisive, I think, than in some of the struggles that a lot of people's parents or older siblings even didn't have to go through. And so they're navigating a lot more than your typical college student. What are you seeing in terms of some of those? I mean, I mentioned a couple, right? Are there others you're starting to see? Is this reflected in some of the students you're talking to?
Yeah, I mean, all the topics you said, Sarah. And I think one through line that I've experienced as a difference, because in some sense, I mean, certainly the what time do you go to bed or noise in the room stuff has always existed. There's also been political differences that have existed. But I think one shift that I've started to observe, and this will also date me, but in my early years teaching, in the early 2000s, and also when I was in university, I think there was a case to be made that was highly persuasive around if we kind of talked with each other, we'd find some common ground. And that common ground could be the impetus for some kind of shared project, right? So if we were to take I don't know, let's just take something like abortion, right? That a pro-life and a pro-choice person would probably not land on their same viewpoint around that issue, but maybe they could do something to support women in crisis. And I think the shift that I've started to notice, and I wonder if it comes up in your work, is that in fact, these people on the other side, there's nothing we have in common. They're kind of creatures of a different reality. There is no shared reality, and therefore, somehow engaging with them is a complete waste of time.
Mm.
The stakes are way too high. Um, and last thing I'll just say around this is the sense that if I do engage, it's a betrayal of my people,
Mm.
my side. And so the cost of that is also really high. And so all of that, I think, takes what was already hard
Yeah.
and makes it way, way harder. And that's a shift that I've felt and seen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I feel like leading to my next question is maybe why avoidance is a go-to strategy for managing conflict potentially. But now, I do feel like the poles of it's either, really extreme at times activism potentially like pro conflict, right, or really avoidant of conflict. Any idea in terms of why college students might prefer avoidance as their conflict strategy?
Oh yeah, for sure. So, so I was very fortunate this book project that I did was with a brain scientist, a guy who is a NYU Grossman.
Mm.
And a lot of his interest in this was looking at, I mean, his own work really looked at brain health of young adults. And, this is in some sense, right, a generation that is more connected than any generation, right?
Yeah.
Because of, these incredible little devices.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you have this incredible high level of depression, of like low self-esteem, of loneliness. And I think part of what is driving, right, the avoidance. So the way our brains kind of react in the face of conflict is we could typically go to one of 5 Fs we identify: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or fester.
Mm-hmm.
And you've kind of brought up the flight piece. And the flight is extremely convenient in all sorts of ways, and highly adaptive, like from thousands of years ago, right? I mean, if you're under assault,
Right.
flight is really a good thing. And
Right.
our brain wants to protect us. And I think part of why we see this happening more in this moment, I would say, is 2 things. One is just the ease of flight is so much higher than it was even 15 years ago, right? Because of social media, because there are these
Mhm.
ways that we can kind of curate these cocoons of comfort. Someone says something that is unpleasant and you disagree with,
Yeah.
you can block
Unfollow.
them.
Right.
Yeah,
You're
Block.
yeah,
done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah,
Actually, you say something back, then
yeah.
you block
Then
them.
you do it.
Right? Now you have 2 great things going on for your brain.
Right.
1, you've relieved the anxiety of them. And 2, all of your people are gonna thumbs up you, love you, like you,
Mm,
right? So your brain
Mm-hmm.
is getting all of these hits.
Right.
And I think the thing that, and this is like for me as someone who, is kind of law trained and taught negotiation and conflict from the perspective of, yeah, how do you kind of resolve conflicts, but not looking at the brain science piece. The brain science piece is so interesting to me because the thing that will make our brain do something that is hard, right? And engaging in a problem solving, hard headed way across a line of difference is nothing if not hard. But the thing that makes us do it is when our brain perceives this is what's called the bigger, better offer. So there's a guy,
yeah,
Mm.
you guys probably know Jed
yeah.
Brewer, right? Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't see the bigger, better offer, we're not going to do it.
Do it. Yeah.
And so for me, like particularly in this moment, that flight thing, or even, can't remember, Liz, if you said it's like to say something nasty and then run.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
You get a little fight and then you flee and
fight,
you're
and then you
great.
flee, and you're getting like your brain's getting all this stuff, right? And we're not counting the long-term social costs of that, which I think is very profound.
Yeah. We talk a lot in our work about short-term versus long-term benefits.
Yeah.
And so I think that bigger, better offer, when it's further out into kind of the ether or maybe more of a hypothetical. It can be, it's like, well, hey, that's in 10 years from now, right? But right now,
Yeah.
if I unfollow, I feel good in the moment. What I love about your work is that it feels so optimistic,
Mhm.
right? Because you hear the word conflict and immediately you can think of all sorts of things. Like I could just say the word and I'm just probably feeling a little bit more tense in my body.
Right.
But
Mhm.
you talk about conflict resilience, which I really, really love. Like, let's tie those words together. So I wonder if, like, that's this idea of what students could really need these days is some sense of like, how can I have these maybe discussions? Maybe how would you rename or rebrand conflict? And how can it be relevant for the dorm room, classroom, and group chats when it comes to that resilience piece?
Yeah. Oh, thanks for asking this. I mean, because a lot of times people kind of, I don't know, they maybe quickly read conflict resilience and they say conflict resolution. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, this is really different. And it's different, I think, because I see the resilience piece, that ability to sit with the discomfort of our disagreement,
Right.
as like a very central, I would say, leadership skill and kind of executive functioning skill.
Mm,
And so here you are in university and you're learning all sorts of substantive knowledge and hopefully how to think critically and be a problem solver. But the only way you could ever be an effective problem solver is if you have some capacity to sit with those with whom you have problems
mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
hash it out. I
Right.
mean, especially if you can vanquish them or otherwise avoid them forever. And whether you are someone who's interested in medicine, environmental science, politics, immigration, the only way we'll ever be able to move forward in any of those challenging issues that we face in our society, right, for our future, is if we have some capacity to sit down with those who see it differently.
Yeah.
And the notion that somehow, even if you think like 30% of only 30% of the people are on the other side, that you can yo-yo back and forth every 2, 4, 6 years and actually solve these problems doesn't make sense. And so I think the resilience piece I kind of see as a leadership skill, as very core to really any kind of professional engagement where you're gonna be working with other people.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing, so I would just say around that is that a precondition of being conflict resilient doesn't need to be that at the end we resolve or solve it or agree.
Mm.
That ability to disagree better is just a really valuable and necessary human skill.
Hmm.
And there's benefits, right? Because sometimes even in our disagreement, we have more connection because we are more
Right.
authentic, you
Right.
know?
I love that. Disagree better.
Yeah, I was thinking about that if we kind of piggybacked on that. There's these inevitable conflicts that will happen in college, like we said, whether it's, a dialogue you're having with a professor about an issue that you disagree on or an issue with a roommate or your parent back at home. Understanding that there might be some benefits to approaching something that's emotionally uncomfortable, I think is a helpful incentive, right? But if we're really thinking about how could developing this skill of resiliency in the face of conflict strengthen relationships, what would you say to a college student who's really scared about putting a boundary in place in a friendship or telling a professor that they were maybe, I don't know, out of line in something that they
Yeah.
discussed or
Too
something
harsh
like
Yeah.
with that
that?
grade, or they
Yeah.
Totally.
kind of insulted part of their identity or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love this question. So I think the first thing that I would say is, and in our book, like the first few chapters of the book really focus on what, we call the negotiation or conflict within. So
Mm.
meaning that side of them that is afraid to raise something, they should embrace.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Um, and that side of them that also knows they have something worth saying, something that's
Mm.
important, they should embrace. They're both real. And I think so often, depending on our personality type and maybe our family of origin, and we kind of evaluate one or the other out. So folks who maybe are very aggressive barrel forward with a kind of pugnacious assertiveness that is not really assertiveness, is aggression, and it kind of gets them in
Mhm.
trouble, right? And but then others are like so focused on, I'm worried, what if it doesn't go well?
Yeah.
And I would just say, like, yeah, like it's good to be worried, and you also have something to say. And that is and good and valid, and we should just integrate them. And it often like can give us an opening into the conversation, right?
Right.
There's this side of me that is feeling anxious about this and a bit bad about it and a bit worried about how you'll receive it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And there's a side of me that feels like if we're fill in the blank, if we're gonna make this friendship as good as it
Yeah.
could be, if we're gonna be able to work together as effectively as possible in this project, that it's important for me to raise it.
Mhm.
And the truth of the matter is, right, the other side, I mean, probably the other side is gonna be surprised, right? 'Cause it's just not like what we do most of the time.
Right.
But
Especially if it's a first timer coming in there for
yeah,
like, "Wait, what?"
yeah. And I think though that if the other side, other person actually cares, even if they don't know what to say, they're gonna pause.
Hmm.
And if they're like, I don't really care what you think, or this is weird and I don't want to hear anymore, that will be both painful and also give you really important information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That comes back to that authentic piece, right? Where you're saying like if there's a lot that being kind of pushed under the rug, then you're not necessarily being authentic, and this friendship or situationship or relationship is playing out for longer, and it most likely won't. It'll either implode or fizzle out or something because you're not really being authentic. So the idea is I do think a lot of people can avoid because they don't want the relationship maybe to end, or
Yeah.
they could go in really hardcore and end a friendship or a relationship too early because they weren't
Mhm.
being really flexible. But I I actually think this wasn't necessarily one of the questions I had in my mind, but when you said aggressive versus assertive, right? And I
Mhm.
think about there's like aggression, assertion, and then there's just avoidance. Like I'm not
Yeah.
going to do all of it. What would you say how would you define aggression versus assertiveness? Or maybe another way for me to ask that is if I'm watching someone be assertive versus aggressive, what would I be seeing or feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. I love this. So, to me, aggression looks like various versions of it's my way or the highway. I'm right and you're wrong. Raised voices, table pounding. I mean,
Mhm.
assertion is speaking from your perspective and your experience, but with a confidence. And so it's not a timidity, but it's saying, this feels really important to me. Here's what I've observed in my experience. And that's assertiveness, right? Aggression is, I'm right, you're wrong. This is how it has to be.
Mhm.
And I think part of it's really interesting in my work, and maybe for both of you too in your work. I'm often like when I'm coaching people around conflict and conflict resilience in particular, whether it's, university students in my teaching or executives, sometimes the challenge is they have this internal swirl, this internal conflict that they're not really addressing. And so one side is always winning out. Sometimes, though, it really goes to your question, Sarah. They actually don't have a good model in their head
Mm.
of what good assertiveness is. Like I'll say to them, do you know someone who's really effective at assertion? And they might say, I don't know if I should say this, but I will. Right. Oh, yes. Donald Trump. Okay. Like, let's see how Donald Trump does it.
Mhm.
And they're basically, this larger than life, my way or the highway.
Mhm.
And I'll say, oh, so for you, that's effective assertion. They'll be like, yes. And I'll say, but you don't really want to do that. And they'll be like, no. I'm like, okay, like for them, it's they just don't have a really good model
Right.
of
Mm.
what assertion can look like in a way that feels like something they want to be.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
And so getting out like what the block is, I think is important. And sometimes it could be both, right? Like I'm in this internal swirl. And also, even if I could get past it, I don't know what I would say.
Right. 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 You had to probably break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do think there is this sense of people kind of conflating or putting together assertion and aggression as if they're the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, when thinking about ingredients to conflict resilience, some of the things that, and these are things Sarah and I have talked about in psychological terms. It seems like a willingness to embrace, like you talked about when negotiating with the self, as well as like trusting their gut. We would call that like your wise mind, that
Yeah.
there's something here that like is important for you to pay attention to. And you have to
Yeah.
kind of like trust yourself that like moving forward, let's say with this difficult conversation, is worth your while.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so can we pivot a little bit? Because social media
Yeah.
is really, maybe back in the day, I mean, there was not much conflict on my college campus, but like, I don't know. I think about like the 70s and like, like there's like, I don't know, these walkouts on campus, and there were more like in person conflicts that I think were potentially happening, or discussions that were happening that were difficult. A lot of what's happening for my college students are online in terms of
Yeah.
what is being reposted, what are like news articles, like, there's just a lot of activity happening behind the phone. Any
Yeah.
thoughts in terms of your research or what you've seen about how social media is amplifying conflict on campus? And how can students, I think it's hard to find a middle path between disengaging and overly engaging in it in an ineffective way?
Yeah. I mean, there's to me no doubt that one of the reasons why we see less uh, effective in real life, right, engagement on a campus is because of the social media aspects. And I think this is something that I, started to see very particularly again beginning around 2015, 2016. You would say something in class, and the next thing you know, someone would post something in an anonymous way, and you would
Mm.
feel ruined in some way.
Mhm.
And so then it was like, well, what is the upside of engagement? It's all risk, it's all downside. Okay, that's just restating what you said, Liz. Yeah, right. That's like, okay. But I mean, so I think what are some thoughts I have on this? I think it's challenging. I would just say that as much as possible, if there are ways to set up, certainly like from a professor perspective, some
Right.
sort of shared ground rules or norms about what's gonna stay in the room, how are we gonna engage outside the classroom. Now, are they enforceable? It's gonna depend on the university, it's gonna depend on the atmosphere and the
Right.
space, right? But some intentional work about we talk in our book about, creating conflict resilient greenhouses,
Mm.
and
Say more.
yeah. So I think this is right, how do you set up a set of shared norms and expectations? And certainly universities can do this to some extent. A professor can do it to some extent,
Right.
but also student groups and friend groups can do it to some extent. I do a lot of work with an organization called Seeds of Peace, that originally was founded to bring Israeli and Palestinian young leaders together, and we still
Mm.
do that work. But we also have a program in India, Pakistan, and a U.S. based program. And one of the things that we have done, and this is something that years ago around Israel Palestine was really important, was to set up some rules about how are you going to use and engage Facebook. I mean, back
Mhm.
then it was just Facebook, right?
Mhm.
Um, and even if it's things like instead of writing, we will say in this group, if you're going to do something, you have to record a video. Because the act of recording a video actually ends up having a moderating effect on what someone
Mm.
says.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Right. So I think this is maybe a long way of saying trying to set up some shared ground rules, right? Starting doing what you can to not take the bait when something is triggering, right? And so what could that look like at an individual level? There's a lot in the brain science that we talk about in this book around the power of taking a pause.
Mhm.
Matt Lieberman at UCLA. I'm sure this is stuff you probably share all the time. So it's, I mean, maybe not that exciting for your listeners, right? But this idea of affective labeling,
Mhm. Mhm.
taking a pause, naming the emotions to
Yeah.
yourself, right? That reduces the amount of time that, we call this limbic irritability in
Mhm.
the book is like, it's like driving what's going on, right? And there's research that shows that when you do this, you reduce the amount of time in limbic irritability. And so I think there's some individual strategies that people can take. And I think that, each of us, I mean, there's probably something to be said about, not probably, I'm sure, we don't talk about this in the book, but like, what is a responsible and healthy use of social media
Yeah.
in our lives?
Right, right.
Um, um, but listen, like, I mean, I've been tempted at times when I see something like I want to immediately say something,
Right, yeah.
and I just have to think a few moves ahead. And that's like a negotiation 101, right?
Right.
As well. I mean, put aside conflict, right? Negotiation 101 is i- if I do X, what will you likely do in response?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Then will happen, and then will happen. And that's how we end up with conflict spirals. That's how we end up in world wars, right? That's how we end.
Right, right, right. When
And
everyone's just reacting a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we don't think about, we only think about what we should do, not what's going to happen next and next and next and next. And so that's just a really important piece,
Mm-hmm.
of handling social media, and conflict as well.
Right. By the way, even though you might be saying some things that we have talked about or know about, our listeners are sick of hearing us say it. So I think they're just excited to have anyone else say it. And it also validates us. We're like, see, a lawyer and a conflict resolution expert and a brain doctor are also saying these things.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
no, that helps us.
Oh, good. Well, I would say a fair amount of the early part of the book, I did some work for about 10 years, a partnership with people in what was then called the Family Institute of Cambridge, and they did
Mhm.
IFS, internal family systems
Mm-hmm.
work. And I think IFS is such a valuable tool, as I'm sure both but in conflict and negotiation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And in conflict and negotiation is, I would say, often underexamined and understudied because people are very much just focused on the behavioral kind of skills across that conflict and negotiation table. And for me, in so much of my work, part of what drew me to IFS and work that I'm sure you guys do in the therapy world is I can write out what I should say. I could imagine what the right thing to do is, but it's what's stopping me, what's holding me back, what are the stories and the narratives. And that work is really fascinating and just opens up like incredibly useful and powerful space, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this is so great. And I know we have taken up already so much of your time. I did want to say, if there's one, and perhaps we're hacking into your book a little bit, so you can shift it if it's not this, but if there's one small shift or one small ways, practical ways that they could start to build in conflict resilience into their narrative. One of the things that you wrote maybe is a practical framework of naming, exploring, and committing. You've already started to say, labeling that emotion, etc. So I like that idea as a practical framework. You could jump off from there or say, actually, if it was to start, if there's one small way they could start to do it today, in the next 5 minutes or the next day, what would you say to start with?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's like reframe the idea of conflict in
Yeah.
your mind.
Mm
Yeah.
hmm. Mm hmm.
Just to try to see conflict as an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
for connection and a normal part of life and relationship,
Yeah.
as opposed to something has gone bad or someone has done something wrong.
Right. I love that because certainly in all of our relationships, I think we've all had with our spouse or kids or siblings, etc. I've never had a conflict free relationship with my most important people.
Yeah.
Even my best friends I've had since college, we've had to kind of navigate a few toughies. And
Yeah.
so I'm so glad to still have them because what did you call it again? The better, bigger, better
You get
offer
better off.
of what's out there once you've managed and haven't thrown away or been too aggressive with or set too many boundaries or not been authentic in those friendships. It's like there's definitely a bigger, better offer out there down the road if you can hang in
Yeah.
Yeah.
and see it as conflict as resilience and connection. So
Yeah.
thank you. This is
Well,
great.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm definitely leaving. I think not feeling as like a negative emotional association with conflict, which I love that you ended on that in terms of like how a word that I think for a lot of us has a lot of meaning, not something that I would really want to hug, approach,
Yeah.
value,
Yeah.
that I could see it from a different lens. I I don't think conflict's going anywhere. So
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that you made the opportunity to have you on, and we'll put a link in our show notes to your book and some of your work, and excited for everything to come for you.
I
Yeah.
love it.
What? Such good work.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, and this has been really fun. I love that you're doing stuff like this for our college age audience. I think it's so critical.
Thank you to our guests for sharing their stories and their advice. This podcast is for college students, and we want input by college students, so please reach out by text, email, or voice memo to collegesfinepodcast@gmail.com or 929-500-2231. Tell us your story, give us tips on topics you'd like to hear, or give us feedback about an episode.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at College is Fine Podcast for episode announcements and resources. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Every hit of that plus button helps us keep going.